The year was 1941. In October, I was applying for a scholarship in piano at Mannes. Dear David Mannes was the only person present with Rosalyn. She was so warm, encouraging, that she somehow influenced me to play my very best. So I did get a scholarship in piano with Rosalyn Tureck, and it's a good thing I did, because I was born of very dear church mice, and had I not had this scholarship, my entire life would have been very different. I owe it all to Rosalyn. So after 2 years of study with her at Mannes, there was a fateful conversation. Rosalyn and her husband, who'd been living in the suburbs, decided to move to the city. It was wartime. It was difficult to heat the house in the suburbs. And they were taking a large apartment on Riverside Drive, Upper Riverside Drive. And she suggested that in order for me to have more time in New York, go to more concerts — I never could go to a concert because I lived in New Jersey and the commute was frightful at that hour — she suggested that I take a room in their large apartment. It was a very fateful suggestion. For a year, it was just that. I really had very little to do with them. I got up in the morning, made my breakfast, went out for the day, went to Mannes, taught some, and after a year, unfortunately, they separated and divorced. And that was the beginning of an experience of unfounded trust on her part, and unanticipated experience on mine. Before I talk about some of the details of that, let me say that when I would come home from Mannes or from teaching on Wednesdays in the late afternoon, there would be Rosalyn having finished her teaching, and she'd say to me, "Oh, that dear little boy, he's so sweet, he's so talented." I never knew who the little boy was, and I never saw the little boy. It was sort of like reverse Daddy Longlegs, if you know that childhood story. Many years later, decades later, Rosalyn asked me to go to a matinee concert and have dinner with her afterwards, and she said, "Isn't that nice about Michael Cherry?" I said, "Who?" "Well, he's had," I forget what it was, "some important triumph or appointment." That was the little boy. So much for Michael. But I always remember that. Now, little by little, I seemed to be given all kinds of responsibilities. Suddenly, I was editing and typing Bach lectures. Well, that's fine. I learned a great deal from that. Suddenly, I was dealing with her manager. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't yet 20 years old. I had some very interesting experiences because of the people she invited to the house. For example, when David Diamond composed a sonata for her, he, of course, came by frequently to consult with her about what was going on keyboardistically. He would stay for dinner. And once I came home and found a note on the kitchen table which said, "Such and such is almost ready, but please add cloves." And I found in my collection of letters of her, which I've been going through lately, a little drawing she made on a little scrap of paper of a clove, so that I'd be sure to know what a clove was. She's very, very precise, you see. Well, I would say that the person I met on that October 1941 day was a very different person from the grande dame into whom she evolved and whom we all got to know in later years. Quite possibly, quite probably, the seeds were there. But I think having someone to facilitate her work, which of course her husband had been doing. He wasn't a musician, but he was very good at the business end of things. Having someone who was constant and reliable and trusted helped her. And after I left, which was 5 years later, she had a strength in not only demanding the most from herself, but also knowing how to extract the most from other people. Too many. Because when you live in the same home with someone for 5 years, many, many, many things happen on different levels. I mentioned the trivia of the clove. And in that same line of culinary trivia, it was wartime, and there were meat shortages, and we ate a lot of shellfish. I could not pick up a live lobster and drop it into boiling water. But please picture the great Rosalyn Tureck in those days picking up a live lobster, plopping him into hot water and thinking nothing of it. I think that's pretty amusing. It was a complete learning experience. It was not easy because I was still practicing. I very fortunately had been hired to Manus because it was immediately post-World War II, and there were getting to be little children born and wanting piano lessons. And I also had some other jobs out of the city. But I managed because, as you all know, there was something about her that was appealing, compelling, and irresistible. You couldn't say no when Rosalyn wanted something. Because of my good fortune at being hired at Manus, in which Rosalyn herself took great pride, my ability to continue helping her and doing any research, of course, was finished. But the friendship continued to the end. It was bifurcated. The musical relationship was bifurcated by my being invited to Manus, but the friendship was forever. I have letters from her being on tour. I have a precious postcard from Australia. Now, what do you think she would have sent from Australia? If you really knew her, you'd say she would have sent, which she did, a close-up picture of the back view of a koala and wrote, "Isn't this a darling, cuddly animal?" Nothing about the tour, nothing professional, but that. Yeah. I would say determination. This answer is an extension of what I said a moment ago. She was going to be who she became. I think there was never a question in her mind. She lived that way, and I think she taught that way too. Her teaching was clear, exacting, and demanding. And that's the way she was as a person, and of the people who worked with her. She gave a very sound, comfortable technical instruction. I can remember summers practicing for hours on end, as she did all year, never being tired or feeling pain. Pianists I know wind up with an aching this or a broken that. Never, never, never a trouble with hands, ever. I think that's determination is her main quality, personally and in her work. She was a force, F-O-R-C-E. a very great influence. Even though she was teaching me about the piano and about music, not only Bach. When she first got a student in those days, she assigned a very Catholic repertoire. She asked me to read Freud's Introductory Lectures, a book of biographies called 12 Against the Gods, by William Bolitho. You can tell from the title what it was about. And the other was Fraser's The Golden Bough. I don't know whether people are aware of that now, but it was really a history of superstition and religion through the ages. In addition to which, she gave me as a gift a history, not of music, but of art. Years later, 1957 actually, she's the one who encouraged me to take my first trip to Europe, which I wanted to do, but about which I was a little hesitant for many good reasons. She said, "You come ahead, you are welcome." She, by this time, lived in London, had a large, I guess it was a duplex in London. "You are welcome to stay in my flat as long as you wish, or to use it as a base for making trips to Europe. And what's more, you could then come with me to Holland. I'm playing in the Holland Festival." And a beautiful thing happened there. She had 2 performances in the small hall of the Concertgebouw. Maybe one was a mixed recital of Bach, and I know the other was a concerto with orchestra. But on Sunday morning at 11, when most people would be going to church, she played the Goldberg Variations in a hall in Scheveningen, which is right on the sea. And people emerged from that concert as though they had been to church. We couldn't talk. We went and sat by the seaside. I think there was some brunch, and it doesn't much matter whether or not there was brunch. That was it. So she then went back to England, and I took off on my first tour of Europe, and she was the spur. Well, in the end, I believe it will be enormous. I'm sorry to say that she had a difficult time not being taken as the odd one. In going through these letters that I mentioned before, I found 2 clippings from the New York Times, which I don't ever remember having read, let alone clipped. They were from March of 1942. I'm not sure why, but Rosalyn wrote a letter to the editor about not only the possibility, but her managing to play the Goldberg Variations on 1 keyboard. She explains what she did, why it's possible, how it can be done by others. The response to that was so antagonistic. There was a letter from Isidore Philippe. Again, perhaps you younger people don't remember, he was one of the great pianists of the early part of the century. And he headed his letter in defense of Busoni, apparently with whom he had studied and whom he knew. And he was defending Busoni's transcriptions, which Rosalyn had not disrespectfully, but matter-of-factly, shall I say, criticized. And it was a very nasty letter. And another response was from the harpsichordist who was then not so famous, but became so, Ralph Kirkpatrick, who again didn't even mention her by name, but that lady, or that young lady, needn't be so boastful about being able to manage on one keyboard. And I think he also questioned the sound of the Goldbergs on the piano. And incidentally, in Rosalyn's letter, she paid homage to Wanda Landowska, the great harpsichordist. Now, we know today that Landowska played Bach in the French style, but in those days, Kirkpatrick was not well known at all. As a matter of fact, I'd never heard of him. But Rosalyn insisted I go and hear Landowska when she played in Town Hall every year, and take a score and make notes. And I still have the score in which I made notes. So that's what professionals thought, that is, famous professionals thought. Her so-called peers, or even elders, because at this time she was still in her upper 20s, really questioned her scholarship and her artistry. I remember people asking why I wanted to study with her. I never studied with anybody else, and I'm glad I didn't. It took a long time for her to gain respect, and I must say, as an American, I'm ashamed, she gained it first in Europe. Now, the Institute will certainly perpetuate her achievements, so I have no concern about that. But I really am saddened in remembering the beginning. I did that the last time we spoke, just days before she died. I just give her a big hug.